Welcome to Prime Life. We call it Retirement 2.0. Leave each episode with tips and new ideas to help you navigate retirement in our new age. It's your time. Make it count.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical, investment, or financial advice. We do not sponsor or endorse any of the individuals, companies, products, or services featured on this podcast. Any statements or opinions expressed are of the individual who makes them. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Prime Life Podcast. Joseph, good morning.
Paul, great to see you. Hope you're doing well.
Laura, you as well.
Always great to be seen.
And Mary, we have a guest who's up very, very early this morning. Do you want to introduce our guest and set up the discussion today?
I certainly will. So today we have Nikki Jardin. She's the publisher and co-founder of Mirador Magazine. This magazine is for individuals experiencing dementia or brain change. Nikki, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you and your co-founder created this magazine.
Well, good morning or good afternoon or hello to everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I am so happy to be here. Thanks. So we created Mirador for my aunt, essentially. I was taking care of an aunt who had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 63. And this was back in late 2016. And I became her primary helper through this journey. And I spent a lot of time with her. And one of the things I was noticing was that she had stopped reading the magazines that she really loved, her National Geographic and, her conservation magazines. And she was actually a researcher on a magazine as well. It was part of her. I mean, she was just a big reader. And I just noticed that she sort of just stopped. And I was learning more about the disease of dementia and sort of what happens physically. And one of the things I learned early on from Teepa Snow, actually, because I started to follow her and watch her videos, is that visual acuity really starts changing quickly. So vision becomes affected pretty early on. And so it occurred to me that she wasn't reading because she didn't want to. She wasn't reading because she couldn't read the text of the small font in her magazines and newspapers that she loved. So I went looking on the internet for magazines and periodicals for people experiencing dementia, and I was really surprised to find a total of 0 magazines available. There were a series of, or there still are, some short books that were written, short form books. It wasn't really her thing. These are beautiful books. They're well done. It wasn't something she was wanting to interact with. So over the next few months, I've been sort of thinking about it. And I was a freelance writer for a long time. I'd worked on magazines, and it just sort of became a natural fit to sort of fill that gap and to create that periodical, general interest periodical for people experiencing dementia and other cognitive change. So that was essentially the start of that.
Language is fascinating. We've been doing a lot of sort of work with LLMs and language. It's interesting how similar we communicate across cultures, across different languages. It's kind of interesting byproduct. Who would have thought of a lot of the AI developments? How does the brain change, and how do you have to shape language to resonate with somebody who's suffering from this type of memory loss?
That's a really good question, and I know they're doing a lot of research on that particular subject. One of the things that we know from the research that we did was that some of it is just as simple visual. If you're looking at a font in a typical magazine, it's about an 8 to 10 point font. It's small, and everything is crammed together on the page, usually in 2 or 3 columns, and sometimes some advertising in there, right? If you're looking at a typical magazine. And that just becomes very confusing to discern for a brain that is changing due to cognitive decline. So one of the things that we started learning about was how to format a page so that the language can actually come through. And some of it is actually very simple. You bring the font up. You bring it. We have a 14-point font in our magazine. You take out a lot of the distraction. You take the columns from 3 or 2 to none columns. You run everything across the page from left to right without breaking it up. You don't have a lot of visuals on the page. You might have one, and it might be large, but you keep the page very simple, and it sort of just frees up. It's sort of like wearing headphones or anything like that. It kind of just takes the distraction, the outer noise out of it, and so it allows people to just simply enjoy the simple act of reading. And one of the things that I've also noticed with Rebecca and with other people is that you might not necessarily retain what you're reading from sentence to sentence, but it doesn't take away the joy of the physical act of doing so. It still will help with lessening anxiety, with increasing enjoyment, with increasing connectivity, with the ability to engage with the material. And that is one of the reasons why we do this, and it's so much fun, and we love working with it.
Yeah, just sort of one follow-up. If I were to take the stories that you've written before as a journalist and looked at the copy that resonates, does the grade level change? Do you strip out words? You talk about distraction. You could also say, well, maybe it's not college level. We're taking the content down to 10th grade or 9th grade. Have you analyzed the text to say that this is how age level changes or vocabulary changes to make it less distracting and more impactful?
For sure. And we try to keep our grade level, and it varies from story to story. In our magazine, we do different levels of content where things might be a little bit more quote unquote advanced, or just a little bit, the vocabulary is a little bit more advanced. One of the ways that we also sort of keep the magazine in a way that's easier to read is we change the sentence structure. Like you're saying, we make the sentences a lot shorter. We don't have a bunch of big run-on sentences. And we also, our paragraphs, if you're looking at the paragraphs, they're all pretty self-contained, so that the paragraphs don't run necessarily from one to the next. In a lot of our stories, we do something called chunking, where each paragraph is actually its own little piece of information. So you don't necessarily have to even know what happened the paragraph before to retain what's going on. But that's a good question around the age level. One of the things that's really important to us with Mirador is that we do not make this into a highlights magazine. I am a huge fan of highlights. I grew up with it. I absolutely love it. We have it at home for the 9-year-old. We do not want to make that into Mirador, because we are talking about adults, and adults don't want highlights. They want a magazine or reading material that speaks to them. So we do try to keep the vocabulary at a level, an age appropriate level. So it's a mix and match. It's more about sort of the sentence structure, the paragraph structure on the page, than necessarily the vocabulary. But we do try to keep it fairly consistent across, so that we're not jumping into, we're not a peer-reviewed sort of, what am I talking, like a study, it's not that sort of thing. But we like to think our stories are interesting.
Yeah. Okay, well, the more I'm pulling this thread, the more, Nikki, I'm seeing parallels, because you mentioned the word chunking. That actually is a technique used to process information, get answers out of these LLMs. It's fascinating. So I bet there will be some interesting use of AI to make it easier to communicate with people with dementia down the road. So, Joseph.
Well, you open up that AI conversation. That's going to be another show down the road for sure. But since someone brought up the Highlights magazine, I'm going to bring up the Reading is Fundamental ads, probably same time frame. it's fundamental. There's been science around neuroplasticity and the importance of engaging the brain as you age. I'm curious. You mentioned, this magazine is more giving people the enjoyment of reading. Has there been any studies about people who have dementia and reading and what it may do and help or not in their health and wellness?
And we'll get that answer after a brief word from our commercial sponsors.
NASA is always working harder to be your carrier of choice. We offer insurance products that can help you meet your retirement goals, such as protecting your savings, securing lifetime income, or paying for healthcare costs. We're dedicated to providing best-in-class service and are keeping things simple, and we'll have your back. We have around 400,000 policyholders and contract holders and have been doing this for a long time, 170 years. But we remain humble enough to always try to improve. For more information, visit nfg.com. Nassau insurance products are issued by Nassau Life and Annuity Company of Hartford, Connecticut, Nassau Life Insurance Company, East Greenbush, New York, or Nassau Life Insurance Company of Kansas, Overland Park, Kansas. Subsidiaries of Nassau Financial Group. Products are not available in all areas. Policyholder counts are for all Nassau companies as of September 30th, 2022, and are subject to change.
Coverite is the first digital concierge health insurance platform focused on Medicare. Their mission is to make Medicare more transparent and accessible for America's 60 million Medicare beneficiaries. By simplifying a traditionally confusing and complex decision, Coverite delivers a simple, seamless, and hassle-free plan selection and enrollment experience. Try the Coverite platform and see for yourself why they've been referred to as the TurboTax for Medicare. Visit coverite.com/podcast to learn more.
There have been studies a lot around reading, and it's actually a big, if you kind of look on the internet, there's a lot of studies around cognitive decline, if it does help people that have already been diagnosed with dementia. And in some cases, nobody's going to say definitively, but they are saying definitively that it can help with anxiety. And it can maintain cognition to stay reading, because reading is such a fundamental tool for us cognitively. It helps our brains in all sorts of ways. So there are parallels to keeping people reading, to keep cognitive, to stave off cognitive decline. It's not going to always, if you are already in a fairly advanced stage, it's not going to reverse this necessarily, but it can maintain a level of cognition as opposed to just not doing any sort of reading at all. And that's true for socialization. That's true for using games or puzzles, anything that sort of keeps the brain, playing music, active and engaged, is going to help with cognition. But again, that's one of the reasons why myself, and there's a couple of others of us now, there's Lorette Clear with Nana's Books is also doing a similar magazine. She's got a fantastic series of books. It's really important to me, just as somebody that's doing this sort of work in this community, to keep people reading as long as possible. And I think that Rebecca would have wanted to keep reading if she had the ability and the accessibility to do so. So, if you can't do something just because there's nothing there to engage you, then you're just going to not do it. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to be one more thing that's taken away from you through this disease. And so we wanted to create something that keeps people active and doing something that they actually really love, which is reading and staying engaged with written text. There is a lot of work around, with tech and tablets and lots of really super cool stuff that's being done in the tech world. But there's a beauty to analog that especially this generation, my generation and older, really loves to hold something and experience the written word on a page as opposed to a screen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I am a big lover of the hard copy or the paperback books. I actually got an email this morning that my library has a few holds for me. I have to go down and pick them up. But talk to us a little bit about you mentioned the ability to interact with the content, and I appreciate that as a reader. And this conversation's, been interesting in a number of ways already, but how can both the individual who's experiencing the cognitive change and a care provider benefit from your magazine?
So you just cut out just for a second, but I think I followed your thread. So we have a lot of our subscribers will purchase copies of the magazine to interact with their loved ones. We have a man, his name is Keith, and he writes me with every issue that comes out and says, "Oh, we really like this one." So he goes and visits his wife every day, who has also early onset Alzheimer's, and she is in long-term care. And he loves the magazine to just read out loud to her. The stories, he says, are short enough that he can get through a whole story and she can follow along. All of our stories are about 250 words. Some are shorter, but none are longer than 250. They're all on one page. So you can read them in 1 to 3 minutes, depending on how fast you read. And so that is a really common way that people are interacting with the magazine, and with reading material in general. So they'll read out loud, and that allows for this connection and this ability to then possibly do a reference to something they had done before, or something they would like to do, or just give them a jumping ground to spark off from. One of the things that's really difficult, and I ran across this with my aunt early on, is your relationship changes so much when you are experiencing dementia with a family member. Things that you used to be able to talk about or have this sort of freewheeling conversation isn't necessarily the same, and it changes from month to month and year to year. And so it can stop people, and it can make people feel uncomfortable sometimes, not always, about how to engage with my loved one, because I can't do it the way that I used to. And something as simple as being able to read out loud what might seem funny at first is a really, when you get into it, very natural way to communicate with people. We've done it our whole lives. We've been read to. We've read to our children or our siblings, or we've been read to as kids. And so there's a very natural, warm, sort of wholesome thing about it. And so that is one way that people have been really enjoying interacting with the magazines, just to read to one another. And likewise, on the other end, we have a woman whose sister has dementia, and she looks at the magazine on a regular basis. She's an early subscriber, so I think she's got all of them now. Where we just published our 10th. But she just loves flipping through and being able to look at the images, and sometimes she can engage, in reading out loud to her sister. But it just sort of gives her an ability to be like, oh, this picture is really cool. I really love this image, or it sparks her being able to converse. So it's simple, but it's powerful and meaningful.
Nikki, how do you decide on what topics you'll write about? And tell us a little bit about some of your contributors.
Yeah, no, I got you. Our contributors. So early on, myself and Tave did a lot of the writing for the magazine, and I still do a big portion of it just because I enjoy it. There's certain sections that I just really like to write myself. But we have been, over the last couple of years, getting more contributors. We have a woman named Judy Stock, who is 80, and she actually has dementia also, and she was a writer for a long time. She's one of Teepa Snow's core team members, and she's been a contributor for several issues now. And varying people will kind of come and go, and we might have each one of our magazines are themed. And so we'll have the tree and sky issue, or we had a space issue. And so we'll kind of build a magazine around that theme. And occasionally we'll get people that say, hey, I would love to write for you, or they have something that's interesting that I think, let me see if I can get that person to contribute a piece. In volume 8, we focused on bicycles. It was called Gear and Pedal. And there's a man named Peter Barry. And I don't know if you know Peter, but Peter is a UK guy, and he was diagnosed with dementia when he was 50. And he's become an outstanding advocate for dementia. He does tons of work with the British government, and him and his writing partner have written a couple of books. It's fantastic. Peter Barry and Deb Bunt, big fans of both of them. So I reached out to Peter for the bicycle issue. I said, hey, would you be interested in contributing a short piece? And to my great delight and joy, he said yes. So it depends on issue to issue where we're at with the articles. Mostly, honestly, it's
Yeah,
a lot of me.
I surely.
Sorry, Paul. Uh, a lot of times with the articles too, it's just me being curious about something, and I will set myself a crazy task, like I'm going to write about the history of planetariums in 250 words. So that's a particular joy of mine.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I agree. There's something about tactile nature of exploring a piece of work to keep your mind sharp. My grandmother loved doing crosswords, loved them. And, now she also typed papers for college students up until she was about 80 years old. And she was disemployed by, I think it was first generation PCs or Macs. It was funny. But she stayed sharp. She lived until 99. And she was doing crosswords up until her vision, got the best of her when she was maybe like 97 or something. But I guess what other forms of media do you think should adapt? Nikki, borrow some of the principles. Should radio, should television, should websites change to address this audience?
I mean, I think so, for sure. There are millions of people experiencing cognitive change, and it might just not be for dementia. There are people experiencing stroke. There are people that had a brain injury and are coming back. We've also seen that with our magazine, where people have had a TBI and they're needing to rehabilitate and start with reading material that is designed more for that brain that's recovering. Like I said, I was really surprised when, several years ago when I went on the internet and I didn't find hardly anything available for reading for this audience. I was stunned. It didn't make any sense to me. So I do think that there's a place for this sort of awareness around building, websites or building more. People once said, "Are you afraid of like having competition?" There is no reason why there should not be 40 different kinds of magazines available for this audience. Sports, music, ballet, fashion. I mean, there's a ton of fashion magazines. There's a ton of general interest magazines out there. There's a ton of nature magazines. I don't know why there aren't more periodicals designed for this particular age group, and books for that matter. There are large print books. They do exist. But they are not necessarily designed for this audience because they're basically just simple. They're just books taken into large print, long form. They're not designed with short chapters. And like I said, there's a couple. There's a couple out there, but they're few and far between. You have to really search for them. I hear that a lot. Like I get customers that will say, "I've been looking for something like this and surprised that it doesn't exist." So it's interesting you mentioned television because everything moves so fast these days. If you watch early 50s and 60s and 70s television, there was a cadence to it that was a lot slower, and it's not that way anymore. There's a lot of effects. There is a lot of, our dialogue has gotten very snappy, and that's hard for people who are experiencing this sort of condition because it doesn't allow them to interact. It doesn't allow them to follow along and be part of the general community. And it makes me absolutely crazy. It's so hard for people that are experiencing this condition. They lose a ton. They lose a lot of their community right off the bat for lots of different reasons. My aunt was an incredibly vivacious, gregarious human being. We just lost her. She just passed a month ago. And, so she lived for almost 7 years with this condition. But she was an absolute crack up in a card, and people just adored her. And she lost a lot of community because she could not engage with it anymore. And the world it's not built for people with cognitive decline. And I know there are people out there that are working on this and trying to help and advocate. I would love to see more of that. There's an interesting correlation. I was doing some research for a piece, and so I'm in Oregon, and our next issue, actually, I just got it back from the printer yesterday, is on ships and compass. So I was looking at like Coast Guard stuff, just kind of getting ideas for articles. And there's a fantastic Coast Guard museum in Astoria, Oregon. And one of the things that they do is they offer a sensory map. And it basically gives you a map of what are the loud areas of the museum, what are the quiet ones. They do a day once a month where they bring all the lights down. They limit the number of people that are in there. And it's essentially, what I learned was, this is essentially for the autism community and people on the spectrum. But this is also a perfect environment for people experiencing cognitive decline, because there's so much stimulation that they can't take in. So I loved seeing that. It made me really happy. And now I've noticed, I'm seeing it more because now I'm aware of it, seeing it more in museums are doing this sort of thing. But this can also be adapted in lots of different ways for this particular community as well. It's a great question. Thanks for bringing it up.
I love that. I don't like loud noises and spaces, so I may have to come to that museum on those days. I'm definitely on the spectrum, and I don't mean that to be any disrespect, but you have to send us a copy of the Bicycle magazine for sure. And Paul, your question earlier about AI and chunking and your follow-up question just now, I think there's stuff already happening. If you think about what YouTube is doing with short videos and how AI can be used to slice up longer videos into shorter videos, it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. And I don't know if the video medium, it has different science behind it and how people absorb that content, but I think it's probably in the works. My question, kind of building on what we talked about earlier, is about timing. Like, is there a point where this is too late? Like, I can't read this. How does that work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And we do have people that sort of time out of the ability to engage physically with the magazine in a way of reading it. It happens. And so we do create a lot of imagery in the magazine for people that the words just stop making sense. Now, some people can just keep going. We had a woman that she was able to read well of even into late stage dementia. The words didn't necessarily track from sentence to sentence, but she loved reading them out loud. So it really depends on the person. We do have a couple of pages where it's just imagery for people to interact in that way. And people still enjoy sharing it with their loved ones. We got a beautiful picture from a reader a couple weeks ago, so we have, you mentioned crosswords, Paul, and so we do have, we'll have a simple crossword, and we have some simple, we have word searches and object finds and a coloring page and stuff. So it's very much of there's a lot going on in the magazine. But we had this photograph of a young person, probably about, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, working on the coloring page with her grandmother, who was pretty late stage at this point. And that is how they were interacting with it. But you're right, there's definitely a time where some people they're not going to be interested. I mean, my aunt certainly just became disinterested in anything like that. She just wasn't able to physically manipulate things like that anymore. So it happens. So there's definitely a sweet spot with the magazine we're finding. But that's why, like somebody like a Nana's book with Lorette's product, I think she's got 30 books right now, and they're very, she's got all the way from poems to haiku to picture books. So she has levels, and they're beautifully produced. And so you get a chance to talk with her. She's a lovely person. One of my favorite. We walk this world together in this advocacy of creating this sort of product.
So, out of curiosity, it sounds as though your followership, your readership is, they love the product, they love what it offers, the engagement opportunities, etc. Have you had anyone write in with any specific requests for content? whether it's, based on a memory or something that they love to do that they haven't had a chance to read about yet.
Now an ad from one of our sponsors. Remember when you could trust the news? Well, then check out Walter. Walter is the free, no-nonsense newsletter for grown-ups that comes to your inbox 3 times a week. From current trends, aging in place, travel, retirement, and everything in between, including a dash of pop culture trivia and throwbacks, Walter is a great way to start your mornings and to stay informed. Oh, and did we mention that it's free? Check us out at thisiswalter.com. Get smart. Get Walter.
That's a great question. We have not necessarily had that. We do get people that will write in and say that one of the things that people would love to see, and we're actually working on this, is a magazine with just stories or with just the puzzles and the games. So we get both of that, because people go, I don't want the puzzles, or I don't want the stories. I just want the games. But that's a good question. We haven't actually had people write in and say, hey, I would love for you to cover X, Y. Actually, you know what? I'm lying to you. An unintentional line. We have had now at least 2 people say, will you please do something on fishing or angling? Because my dad loved to fish, and we'd like to have that. I guess in that theme, I did have a woman. It's early here, so I apologize. I'm not firing quite on all cylinders. So sports, we did get somebody said, hey, could you do something more on sports? So, we work it in. We only do 4 issues a year, and we have, the content. It was a 32-page magazine. So we do, 4 larger features and then a couple, shorter ones. But, so there's not a ton of room for content, but we try. We haven't sorted out all of our themes for next year yet, but I think angling is definitely going to be in there. Fishing, some sort of sporting. This particular issue that just came out, the ships in the maritime one, is something I've been wanting to do for a while, and hopefully it can spark some fun. Rebecca was a big fan of the ocean, so the timing of her passing as we were working on this particular one was bittersweet and lovely for me, because I got to put a lot of stuff in for her that nobody else is going to necessarily know, but I do.
So, Nikki, it sounds like you've done a lot. You've learned a lot on the continuum of this magazine. So what maybe would be next for Mirador?
Well, I think we would like to definitely explore more themes, and we would love to explore more levels in the way that we're producing this magazine. Like I said, maybe doing an entire story issue or an entire puzzle issue, or looking at ways where we can create a magazine that maybe has a higher grade level or a younger, kind of look at those sorts of things. But I can tell you that we are working on a visual component of the magazine. Basically, somebody brought up, I think it was Joseph brought up TV. We are working on a TV, excuse me, representation of the magazine that I'm really excited about, because we are seeing a lot more of this where there is television designed for this audience. We talked about it earlier, but I'm still not seeing a ton of stuff designed for the audience necessarily. So that makes sense. We're seeing a lot of caregiver shows, which is fantastic. A lot of stuff regarding the how to interact with people experiencing dementia. All this is fantastic. We need tons of it. We need more awareness around this. What I'm interested in is, and what we're interested in is, creating content that people can absorb. So slower, interactive, a little bit more interactive. So that's in the works, and Tavi and I are super excited about it for sure. And I haven't brought up Tavi yet, and I apologize to Tavi for that, because she's my co-founder and an amazing person. And people say how gorgeous this magazine looks, and that is all Tavi. I am a writer. I am not a graphics person. I needed a graphics person when I wanted to do this project, and she was the first person I thought of, because we actually play music together in a band, and she does all of our posters and stuff. And so, I needed somebody that was able to take information and lay it out in a way that was, cohesive and clear and clarifying. And so she does all of that with our graphic designer, Ty Euchre, who's also fantastic. Like, I have nothing to do with how gorgeous this magazine is. I just want to say that out loud. This is Tave and Ty making Mirador the absolute beauty that it is.
We did have the pleasure of meeting Tave, so perhaps we can bring you both back on a future episode. She was very delightful, and it was very interesting to hear the story.
She's
well,
fantastic.
This is a fascinating. Yeah. Well, no, listen. Thank you for coming on here. I think there, Nikki, will be so much evolution in the science of linguistics, communicating to people as their cognitive faculties decline. I think we'll be kind of blown away, and I do think AI, some of the advancements will help that. It's interesting. This is the nerd in me, but it's interesting, Joseph. I don't know how much you've looked at translators, right? Like, how does Google translate English to French? It's all math, right? It turns out, like, okay, the distance between, when you build these big vector databases, the mathematical distance between, I guess, like father and son. I'm trying to think what that would be in Spanish. It'd be, I don't know, Papa. I don't know. Turns out it's exactly the same language, and it doesn't matter what language you're in. The same distance, same place, right? So you translate one to the other. Now, when you sort of advance that into LLMs, well, now we actually can see the distance between words and start to say, okay, this group of words is kind of like this group of words, and therefore the concept is kind of similar. Nikki, that's your chunking, right? What you're doing. You're chunking, you're finding, okay, this little set of ideas, it's called cosine similarity, looks like this. Now, one of our colleagues who's helping us do the DevOps stuff, this is fascinating, is helping some people with side project talk to dolphins. Yes, it actually works across animals. So Nikki, it'd be very interesting to know, like, as people's cognition declines, I'm not sure this is really how our brain works, but could we simulate the decline of a function? So if I took this sentence or this paragraph, I suspect that there are probably difficult ways to say certain things, and there are probably very average, easy ways to say certain things. And, coming from my experience with my mother, who's went through this, just kind of lost the ability to sort of take very complicated words in sequence. And I wonder if there's some very simple patterns where you could actually, it's not sort of like, you're not taking and saying, hey, I'm going to take this from college down to 8th grade level. It's really taking it from a complicated artistic way to say something to something that's, like, on average, very easy to comprehend. So, Nikki, I think I think there's fascinating ways you can take your work here over the coming years. Sorry, pardon for the lecture here.
We need to chunk that question.
Chunk it up.
No, it's super interesting, right? And I think that as I watched, Rebecca decline into basically a non-verbal state, I was able to still communicate with her because we know how to do this as human beings. She wasn't able to vocally say anything, but her intonation, it might have been word salad, but her intonation was clear. And this is the beauty of humanity, right? We know how to communicate with each other even when we can't necessarily use language is complex. It's an amazing thing. And I think you bring up a really super interesting point that now I'm going to have to deep dive in and maybe do 250 word story on.
All right. Hey, well, thanks so much. And Nikki, tell us, how can people find out more about your company, get in touch with you? And more importantly, how do you subscribe to your parents or your aunts or uncles who may be suffering from dementia and want to give them the opportunity to enjoy reading?
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been really a really super interesting discussion. So we have a website, miradormagazine.com. And you can go there and hit the subscribe button. And you can go see our shop, and you can buy a single, you can buy a couple different kinds, or you can do a 1-year subscription. So we're quarterly, and it's pretty simple. You can also just email us at miradormag@gmail.com. and you'll get me. This is not a big company. It's me. It's Tave. That's it. There's two of us. And so if you make a phone call or email us, you're going to get me.
Excellent. All right. Laura, Joseph, Mary, thanks so much. And I want to thank our listeners. Give us feedback, like our show, subscribe, and certainly recommend it to others. And join us again next week for another episode of Prime Life Podcast. Thanks.
Remember to subscribe to the Prime Life Podcast anywhere you find podcasts. You can find all of our episodes, contact information, and more on our website, primelifepodcast.com. Stay connected with us. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.